What transforms a strong, confident man into a frightened child the moment emotions enter the conversation? Picture this scene. Michael, 35 years old, successful executive who manages teams of 20 people, completely freezes when his wife asks him to discuss his feelings. His hands start sweating, he searches for excuses to leave, creates sudden, urgent appointments. What's happening inside his mind? According to Freud, every man carries within himself a primitive fear rooted in childhood, the fear of emotional abandonment, disguised behind a facade of invulnerability. This hidden weakness governs more behaviors than we realize, influencing our relationships, our choices, and even our professional success. Today, you'll discover 6 psychological signals that reveal this secret vulnerability, and how recognizing them can completely transform your understanding of male behavior. If you want to continue exploring the secrets of human behavior, subscribe to the channel. The first signal we'll analyze deals with exactly what Michael was experiencing, the flight from emotional vulnerability. The first signal of hidden male weakness manifests through what Freud called the avoidance mechanism, the compulsive tendency to flee from any situation requiring emotional openness. Imagine your wife telling you, "We need to talk about our relationship." Immediately you feel as if someone activated an alarm in your brain. Your body stiffens. You desperately search for an escape route. "I can't right now. I have an important call." Or, "Let's talk tomorrow. I'm too tired." This isn't coincidence. It's pure psychological survival. According to Freudian theory, this reaction stems from a primordial trauma every male experiences during childhood, the fear of being judged inadequate by the maternal figure. The child learns early that showing weakness can mean losing the love and protection of his caregiver. Thus, he develops what Freud defined as character armor, a protective barrier separating him from deeper emotions. In adulthood, this armor transforms into specific behaviors. The man avoids deep conversations, changes topics when feelings are discussed, takes refuge in work or activities that make him feel competent and in control. It's not malice or indifference. It's pure emotional survival. But here's the paradox Freud had brilliantly intuited. The more a man flees from vulnerability, the more vulnerable he becomes. Why? Because the woman instinctively perceives this flight as rejection, creating exactly that abandonment dynamic he feared most. The wife begins feeling excluded, unloved, unconsidered. She increases demands for emotional intimacy, and he proportionally increases avoidance behaviors. A vicious cycle forms that can destroy even the most solid relationship. Recognizing this mechanism is the first step to breaking it. When you feel the impulse to flee from an emotional conversation, stop for a moment and ask yourself, what am I really fearing? Being judged? Not measuring up? Losing control? Have you ever seen this pattern in yourself or your partner? Awareness is already half the solution, but fleeing from vulnerability is just the tip of the iceberg. The second signal we'll analyze involves even more subtle and destructive behavior: projecting inadequacy. The second signal of hidden male weakness is perhaps the most destructive: projecting inadequacy through systematic criticism of the partner. Imagine this situation. Luke returns home after a difficult day at the office where he felt inadequate facing his boss. Instead of talking about it, he immediately starts criticizing his wife. "Why is the house always messy? You never manage to organize yourself. Look how you cooked the pasta. It's overcooked." She remains confused and hurt, not understanding where all this aggression comes from. Freud had identified this mechanism with extreme precision. When the ego cannot manage feelings of inadequacy, it projects them outward to protect self-esteem. This is what psychoanalysis calls defensive projection, transferring one's perceived flaws onto another person, usually the closest and safest one. The man who feels professionally inadequate begins finding faults in his wife's domestic competence. One who feels physically insecure criticizes the partner's appearance. One who doubts his parenting abilities attacks how she manages the children. It's not awareness. It's pure psychological defense. The mechanism works like this. Instead of saying, "I feel like a failure," the unconscious translates it into, "You are inadequate." It's easier to bear the idea that the problem is external rather than internal. But this seemingly protective strategy creates enormous damage in relationships. The woman, who often has developed greater emotional literacy, instinctively perceives that behind these criticisms lies masked pain. But instead of receiving understanding and support for his insecurities, she finds herself under attack precisely when he would most need support. Freud observed that this pattern is particularly intense in men who received education based on performance rather than unconditional acceptance. They grew up hearing phrases like, "A real man doesn't complain," "You must be strong," "If you're not first, you're last." They learned that personal worth depends on results, not on being. When adult reality presents inevitable moments of inadequacy, the only way they know to manage this threat to self-esteem is deflecting focus onto someone else. It's a survival mechanism learned in childhood and automated in adulthood. The tragedy is that this projection destroys precisely what the man desires most, feeling loved and accepted despite his imperfections. By criticizing the partner, he ensures he'll never receive that emotional security he desperately needs. Have you ever noticed moments when your criticisms toward your partner arrived precisely when you felt most insecure about yourself? The third signal we'll explore is even deeper: control masked as protection, a pattern revealing the most ancient fear of the male soul. The third signal of hidden male weakness manifests through apparently noble behavior, hyperprotectiveness that conceals a compulsive need for control. Imagine Elena wants to go out with friends for an evening. Robert, her husband, immediately starts with a series of reasonable concerns. "But it's late. That area isn't safe. Who exactly are you going with? I don't trust that friend of yours. She drinks too much." From the outside, it seems like caring, but Elena perceives something different, a tightening grip. Freud had intuited that behind male protective instinct often hides a primordial fear, the terror of abandonment and loss of control over the relationship. This fear is rooted in what he called castration anxiety, not understood literally, but as deep fear of losing one's power and relevance. The man manifesting this signal usually lived childhood experiences of powerlessness, parents who fought and he could do nothing, chaotic family situations where he felt at the mercy of events, or emotional abandonments that deeply marked him. His psyche learned a simple but devastating equation: control equals security. In adulthood, this translates into specific behaviors. He must always know where the partner is, who she talks to, what she does. He monitors social media, controls expenses, decides weekend plans himself. It's not jealousy in the traditional sense. It's anxiety management through environmental control. The psychological mechanism is subtle but powerful. When the wife is under his protective umbrella, he feels useful, necessary, safe from the ghost of abandonment. But when she seeks independence, even the most innocent, the primitive alarm triggers. If she doesn't need my protection, maybe she doesn't need me. Freud explained this pattern through drive theory. Eros, the life and union instinct manifesting in the need to maintain partner closeness, and Thanatos, the destructive instinct emerging when this control is threatened. The man unconsciously becomes destructive toward the woman's independence because it represents an existential threat. The tragedy is that this behavior produces exactly the result he fears most. The woman begins feeling suffocated, limited in her personal growth, treated like a child incapable of caring for herself. She starts desiring freedom and space, confirming his fears and further intensifying control behaviors. The hyperprotective partner cannot see that true security in a relationship comes from mutual trust and individual growth, not from control. His hidden weakness leads him to sabotage precisely what he wishes to preserve. Can you recognize episodes where your protection actually concealed a need for control? The fourth signal we'll analyze touches an even deeper chord: emotional competition, where the man unconsciously transforms love into a battle to win. The fourth signal of hidden male weakness emerges when the man unconsciously transforms every emotional interaction into a competition to win, completely losing the essence of intimacy. Imagine this scene. Sophia confides to Matthew that she's worried about her mother going through a difficult time. Instead of offering understanding and support, Matthew immediately responds, "At least your mother talks to you. Mine never calls me. Yet I do much more for her than you do for yours." Sophia is bewildered. She was seeking comfort and found herself in the middle of a contest of who suffers more. Freud had identified this pattern as manifestation of the unresolved Oedipal complex. The man who never learned to exit the competitive dynamic with the father figure transfers this need to excel into every context, even the most intimate and vulnerable. This mechanism is rooted in traditional male education. From childhood, the boy learns that life is a series of competitions: who runs faster, who's better at school, who scores more goals. This competitive mentality, useful in certain contexts, becomes devastating when it infiltrates emotional intimacy. The man with this signal cannot simply be present in his partner's pain or joy. He must always demonstrate that his experience is more significant, his problems more serious, his solutions more effective. When she's sad, he finds a way to be sadder. When she celebrates success, he must recall his greater achievements. The underlying psychological mechanism is fear of irrelevance. If he's not the best, the most important, the most necessary, what will become of him? Freud explained this through narcissistic libido, psychic energy invested in one's image of superiority as emotional survival strategy. But here's the destructive paradox. The more he tries to win in the relationship, the more he loses. The woman doesn't seek a competitor, she seeks a companion. She doesn't want demonstrations of superiority, she wants authentic connection. When every emotion becomes transformed into competition, she begins closing off, sharing less and less, seeking elsewhere that space of shared vulnerability. The competitive man cannot understand that in intimacy there are no winners and losers. There are only two people choosing to be vulnerable together. His need to excel deprives him of love's deepest beauty, feeling accepted in his imperfection. This pattern is particularly evident during conflicts. Instead of seeking shared solutions, he transforms every discussion into a debate to win. He must always have the last word, prove he's right, make the other person capitulate. It doesn't matter if he destroys emotional connection in the process. The important thing is not losing. Freud observed that men with this signal often come from families where affection was conditional on performance. Good job, you won. Dad is proud of you when you're first. They never experienced unconditional love, so they don't know how to offer or receive it. Have you ever transformed your partner's intimate moment into an occasion to demonstrate your superiority? The fifth signal we'll explore reveals an even more subtle and dangerous dynamic, sabotaging happiness, where the man unconsciously destroys moments of joy to maintain emotional control. The fifth signal of hidden male weakness is perhaps the most painful to recognize: the unconscious tendency to sabotage moments of happiness and serenity in the relationship. Imagine this situation. Claire and Andrew are experiencing a perfect weekend. She's radiant, feels connected, in love. Everything proceeds wonderfully until, inexplicably, he starts finding problems where none exist. He criticizes the restaurant she had chosen, complains about traffic, becomes cold and distant. In minutes, the magical atmosphere transforms into tension and misunderstanding. Freud had identified this pattern as manifestation of what he called success neurosis, the inability to tolerate prolonged positive emotional states. For unconscious fear they might be suddenly taken away. It's safer to destroy happiness before someone else does. This mechanism is rooted in specific childhood traumas. Children who experienced moments of joy, followed by punishments or abandonments, who learned to associate happiness with imminent danger. Their psyche develops an alert system that triggers precisely in moments of maximum emotional vulnerability. The man manifesting this signal has learned a destructive equation: happiness equals danger. When everything goes too well, when she's too happy, when connection is too deep, the primitive alarm activates. Not consciously, but through automatic sabotage behaviors. Sabotage mechanisms are subtle but devastating. He might start a fight from nothing, bring up past problems at the worst moment, become suddenly critical or detached. It's not malice, it's preventive protection against disappointment his psyche considers inevitable. Freud explained this through repetition compulsion. The unconscious prefers repeating painful but familiar dynamics rather than risking experiencing something new and potentially more devastating. It's better to control pain than suffer surprise from unexpected loss. Happiness sabotage also manifests through inability to celebrate the partner's successes. When she achieves an important goal, instead of rejoicing together, he finds ways to diminish the achievement. It was just luck. Others have done better. Don't exaggerate, it's just a job. He cannot bear seeing her too happy and autonomous because this awakens his fear of no longer being necessary. The tragedy of this pattern is that it creates exactly the dynamic he fears most. By repeatedly sabotaging moments of joy, he teaches the woman that with him, she cannot be completely happy. She begins holding back emotionally, not celebrating successes, walking on eggshells during beautiful moments to avoid him destroying them. Thus, the self-fulfilling prophecy realizes the relationship actually becomes less joyful, less spontaneous, less vital. The man can tell himself, "See, I was right not to trust. In the end, happiness always ends." But he himself caused this ending. Freud observed that overcoming this pattern requires deep reworking of the relationship with joy. The man must learn that shared happiness is not a danger to avoid, but the very foundation of mature love. Can you remember moments when you unconsciously sabotaged happiness in your relationship? The sixth and final signal we'll analyze touches the deepest core of male fragility: emotional dependence masked as independence. The sixth and deepest signal of hidden male weakness is the supreme paradox: total emotional dependence on the partner masked by a facade of complete independence and self-sufficiency. Imagine Alexander, who constantly boasts about not needing anyone. "I'm fine alone," he often repeats. "I'm not like those men who can't live without their wives." Yet when Francesca goes out with friends, he bombards her with messages. When she's in a bad mood, he panics. When she threatens to leave him during a fight, he completely collapses. His declared independence is a mask hiding total dependence. Freud had identified this as the central conflict of the male psyche, the vital need for emotional fusion with the mother partner, in contrast with the social imperative of autonomy and strength. This unresolved conflict generates what he called reaction formation, behaving exactly opposite to what one really feels. The man with this signal has built his entire identity on the idea of not depending on anyone. In childhood, he learned that showing need equals weakness, that a real man is self-sufficient. But the need for emotional connection is a primary impulse that cannot be erased, only masked. Thus he develops unconscious strategies to obtain the attention and care he desperately needs, while pretending not to want them. He gets sick more often when she's distant, becomes suddenly incompetent in household chores when she threatens to leave, creates crises and dramas, forcing her to take care of him. The mechanism is devastating because it denies the woman the possibility of loving freely. She perceives the desperate need behind the independence mask, but cannot respond openly because he would deny everything. A dynamic of hidden love forms, where care must be offered secretly and needs satisfied indirectly. Freud explained this through the theory of the phallic mother. The man seeks in his partner a figure who is simultaneously nurturing mother and sexual object, but cannot admit either need because both threaten his virile image. Masked dependence also manifests through pathological jealousy. The man who doesn't need anyone becomes obsessed with the idea that his partner might be interested in someone else. He cannot say, "I'm afraid of losing you because you're everything to me." So he translates it into, "You're too flirtatious," or "I don't trust that guy." This dynamic is particularly toxic because it deprives both partners of authenticity. He cannot receive the love he needs because he denies wanting it. She cannot love fully because she must do it secretly, indirectly, always balancing between satisfying his hidden needs and respecting his autonomy facade. The final paradox is that this independence mask makes the man completely dependent on maintaining the fiction. He must constantly prove he doesn't need anything, which requires enormous psychic energy and distances him further from the authentic intimacy he desires. Freud observed that healing begins when the man can admit, "I need you, and this doesn't make me weak, it makes me human." Only then can he experience mature love, the kind that nourishes instead of imprisoning. Have you ever hidden your emotional needs behind a facade of independence? Understanding these 6 signals can completely transform your awareness of the deepest relational dynamics. These patterns aren't character flaws. They're survival strategies learned in childhood to protect against pain. Recognizing them is the first step to transforming them from obstacles into bridges toward authentic intimacy. The question I leave you with is deep and personal. Which of these signals do you recognize most in your experience? And what would you be willing to change to build more genuine and nourishing relationships? Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. It's incredible to see how universal human psychology is, something Freud intuited over a century ago.